A private jet touched down at Birmingham Airport this week after nearly 10 hours in the air, and by the time the wheels finally stopped, the actual story behind that flight had already started leaking out through a very different route than the official one presented publicly.
Breaking today, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle land in the UK on a private jet. This is the reverse freedom flight, but all is not as it seems. My reporting on this finally being caught up with the mainstream media, specifically the Daily Mail, now confirming a long-term separation, physically at least, between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
The plane itself was reportedly named Planet 9, a charter that's apparently been used before by the Kardashian-Jenner circle, and the estimated cost for the trip alone runs somewhere between £90,000 and £140,000. That's before anyone touches the environmental math on a flight that length, or the broader irony of a couple whose business ventures have leaned so heavily on sustainability, messaging, chartering exactly this kind of aircraft. But the actual substance of this story isn't the aircraft. It's what journalist Alison Boshoff has since reported about why this move is happening at all, and how long it's genuinely expected to last.
It is a separation. It is a physical separation. It is a career separation. It is a parenting separation. I mean, Meghan Markle, who claims to put being a mum first, which we always knew was total poppycock, is actually not even going to be in the UK for the bulk of the kids turning up at school. But there is a performative aspect to all of this, Tash.
Of course there is. And I think the constant media briefings that we're seeing going on is also a gameplay. This is also going to enable Meghan to play victim.
According to Boshoff's sourcing, friends close to Harry describe this as something closer to a 15-year commitment than a temporary visit, a timeline long enough to cover essentially every remaining year of both children's schooling from start to finish. And crucially, her reporting includes something that hasn't shown up much elsewhere at all: confirmation that there's actually been no apology extended to the royal family ahead of this arrival, and that the whole thing has moved with a striking speed that left very little room for any kind of formal reconciliation groundwork beforehand. 15 years is worth sitting with as an actual number rather than letting it slide past as a rough, vague figure the way headlines often treat these kinds of details. That's not a season, or even a stretch of years. It covers essentially the entirety of both children's remaining childhood, from where they currently stand through university age.
But I just wanted to mention it before we got started today, Tash, because I think when you look at true global icons, right, she stood above everyone. She stood above politics. She stood above wokery, and she didn't do victimhood. And I'm like thinking about it and thinking about the response to Dolly Parton's death and how it is total unity and how there has been virtually no political divide on this, and what a contrast it is to Prince Harry and Meghan, who have decided to use their fame and their power for negative reasons, to create division, for ill, to stoke a culture war.
Committing to a timeline that specific and that long suggests a level of planning considerably more deliberate than the reactive, spur-of-the-moment framing the initial headlines seem to suggest. Tom Sykes, speaking with Boshoff about her own reporting, put it plainly: there's been no real buttering up of the family here. No proper preparation. Just what he described as the couple barging back in. Not unlike how they reportedly pushed their way toward that July meeting through what he characterized as emotional pressure rather than any diplomatic process. That specific comparison to the July meeting is worth pulling apart a little further because it establishes a pattern rather than an isolated complaint.
But this is Harry and Meghan's sources that keep going to these various outlets. And I can't help but feel it's almost like they want to be hounded by the press, much like what they did when Meghan did the summer holiday photo drop. She wants the media to know that they do have that place in Portugal. She practically confirmed it. This is where we eat. This is where we go. This is where we shop. Come find us the next time we're on holiday there.
If both the summer visit and this permanent relocation followed the same basic approach, informing the family close to the last possible moment, then relying on the emotional weight of children and grandchildren to smooth over any objections, that suggests a repeatable strategy rather than a one-off lapse in planning. Families navigating genuine estrangement typically build trust incrementally, through smaller gestures that demonstrate good faith over time. Two major moves in quick succession. Both reportedly handled the same abrupt way, doesn't fit that slower, more careful pattern. Boshoff's sources also describe something considerably more specific than the general reunion narrative suggests. A genuine, long-term physical separation between Harry and Meghan.
I mean, it's honestly laughable that Meghan is trying to peddle that she has to go back to America. She doesn't. And the bigger thing is here, I mean, I've had lots of friends that have separated, sadly, over the years. You know, marriages and relationships crumble, but it's very, very, very rare that it's the mum that is the one that walks away.
One that isn't framed as a crisis exactly, but as a settled arrangement both of them have apparently accepted going forward. Consider how unusual that framing actually is compared to how most couples describe practical living arrangements. Plenty of relationships involve one partner traveling more than the other for work, or spending stretches of time apart for career reasons. What's different here is the specificity and permanence being described. Not an occasional business trip, but a structured calendar map division of the year that both sides have reportedly already agreed to before the family is even properly settled into a permanent home. That level of advanced planning around separation, before the actual relocation has even properly begun, isn't typical of how most families approach a properly unified move.
Of course there is. And I think the constant media briefings that we're seeing going on is also a gameplay. This is also going to enable Meghan to play victim. There are so many stories being planted at such an alarming speed. It's causing confusion, but it also enables Meghan and Harry to turn around and say, look, poor Meghan, she's barely stepped foot in the country and already people are laughing at her. People are being cruel about her. And it's all going to be added together for Meghan to go back to America saying, the UK was just horrible about me.
Here's how that arrangement reportedly breaks down. Harry and the children are expected to be based in the UK, with a specific goal driving the whole decision: getting Archie and Lilibet into British schooling, ideally somewhere in or near the Cotswolds. According to friends quoted by Boshoff, Harry's been building toward this specific outcome for years, quietly researching schools and speaking with head teachers well before any of it became public. The reported budget for a country house near the school sits around £8 million. Though, as of the actual arrival, no property had been secured. That last detail is worth sitting with on its own. A family reportedly committing to a 15-year relocation, with school applications already underway and an £8 million property budget set, arrived in the country without an actual house to move into. That's an unusual gap for a plan described as having been in development for years.
But any suggestion, which Meghan has briefed to the media in recent days, that this is going to be temporary for Prince Harry and that actually they could end up in Australia or Canada, total baloney. Alison Boshoff, briefed by friends of Harry, says this is a 15-year plan. And she confirmed to Tom Sykes on The Royalist today that there has been no apology from Prince Harry or Meghan Markle to the British royal family before this despicable arrival.
Either the timeline actually accelerated faster than the housing search could keep pace with, or the housing search wasn't actually as far along as the broader narrative around years of careful planning suggests. Meghan's role in that arrangement looks considerably different. According to the same reporting, she's already mapping out which specific weeks she'll need to be in the UK during school terms, and which stretches she'll spend back in California. Christmas, according to this account, is planned for Montecito rather than anywhere near Sandringham. School holidays are largely earmarked for California too, where her mother Doria lives, along with what Boshoff describes as a fairly small circle of California friends, polo player Nacho Figueras and his wife among them. That specific detail about the social circle is worth noting on its own terms.
I mean, it's not like she has a successful career. Everything that they have touched has fallen apart. You know, their latest involvement producing with Cookie Queens, that's definitely not worked out. I think anybody that saw her completely overtake the media circus that was meant to be promoting Cookie Queens will think, I wouldn't want her jumping in on my projects. What is she going back to America for other than to get away from Harry and the children? So it's definitely unraveling at such a speed, a cracking speed. It's hard to keep up with everything at the minute.
6 years into a supposedly fulfilling new life in America, the actual named social connections still reported publicly remain fairly limited. One prominent friendship gets highlighted repeatedly across multiple pieces of reporting: rather than a broader, thriving social world. That doesn't necessarily mean the wider social life doesn't exist. But it does suggest the version of California life being sold publicly, full of warmth and genuine community, may be considerably thinner than the marketing around it implies. Term time alone runs roughly 30 weeks a year. Even within that window, Meghan reportedly won't be present for the bulk of it, which means the actual practical arrangement, stripped of any softer framing, looks like Harry raising the children in Britain while Meghan spends a meaningful majority of the year elsewhere.
So what you're seeing is all of the mainstream outlets that receive briefing from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are having to go along with what is an obvious lie, which is that, oh, no, they're totally happy. They're totally happy that this was all done together. And I think Alison got closer than the rest of the mainstream.
Run the actual math on that specific breakdown because the numbers matter more than the general framing. If term time covers 30 weeks and Meghan isn't present for most of that stretch, combined with holidays reportedly split toward California, the realistic total of time she actually spends physically present with her children in their day-to-day British life could plausibly fall well under half the calendar year. That's a considerably different picture than typical language around a family relocation usually implies, closer to a long-distance parenting arrangement than a household that simply moved together to a new country. That's the detail that's generated the most conversation among royal commentators this week. Not whether the couple is technically still together, but what a marriage structured this specifically around geographic distance actually signals about where things currently stand.
You will see how happy they look when they are here. It's very possible to have the kids at school in the UK and Meghan still working on her business in California. Now, again, I find that briefing fascinating because if you're seriously telling us to judge the happiness in Harry and Meghan's marriage based on how happy they look, then Harry has been unhappy and the marriage has been screwed for a number of years, which it has, by the way.
A source close to the couple, quoted in Boshoff's reporting, offered a specific line worth sitting with, that Meghan isn't doing this because she wants to, but because she believes she has to. That she doesn't want to lose Harry, and recognizes something in the relationship needs to change. The same source, in the very next breath, insisted this doesn't reflect any real strain in the marriage, describing it instead as a decision they've both agreed to and both believe serves their children. Those two statements sit somewhat awkwardly next to each other. One describes a woman making a difficult, almost reluctant choice specifically to preserve her marriage. The other insists nothing about the marriage actually needed preserving in the first place. Read that particular quote once more, slowly, because the contradiction inside it doesn't resolve no matter how many times you go through it. You cannot simultaneously be doing something specifically to avoid losing your husband and also be in a marriage that reportedly has nothing wrong with it. Those two framings describe fundamentally different emotional realities, and both apparently came from the same source, in the same conversation, within the same short passage of reporting.
They have both got huge egos, and already you're seeing such chaotic press briefings from people that we know are inside the Sussex WhatsApp group, where they almost seem to be conflicting. So it's only going to be a matter of time before Harry and Meghan start trying to get one over on each other, I would imagine, as they both vie for attention, especially in the media. So I think this is going to start turning nasty sooner rather than later if this is turning into an official separation.
There's a separate strand of reporting worth, including here for balance, because the school-focused explanation does hold up under some scrutiny even if the marital framing feels shakier. According to friends quoted by Boshoff, Charles was reportedly told well before this became public that UK schooling was the plan, and William had apparently known for around 6 months as well, directly contradicting any suggestion the family was blindsided by a sudden announcement. Harry had also reportedly mentioned, semi-jokingly, on a podcast appearance last month, that he saw himself functioning as something close to a full-time father going forward, a detail that lines up with the broader framing of him as the primary at-home parent in this new arrangement. That specific timeline detail deserves some weight, because it complicates the more cynical read of this entire story. If William actually knew 6 months out, and Charles knew even earlier, the sudden, chaotic framing that's dominated public coverage doesn't fully match what was apparently happening internally within the family itself.
The only real motivation for the relocation is Prince Harry's fervent desire to give their children a gold star education, and for him, that means it simply has to be in a UK school. He and Meghan say friends have been kicking this idea around for years, but became very serious about it last year, to the point of obtaining prospectuses and speaking to head teachers.
Public surprise and private awareness can coexist without contradiction. A family might reasonably know something is coming while still finding the eventual public execution of it chaotic or poorly handled. But it does mean the specific accusation that the family was ambushed doesn't hold up as cleanly as some of the more dramatic coverage has suggested. On security specifically, the financial picture gets more complicated. Living in California reportedly costs Harry close to $2 million annually in private protection. A move back to Britain, depending on how security arrangements eventually shake out, could theoretically reduce that figure. Though setting up an entirely new household from scratch carries its own significant costs that would need covering regardless. That security cost detail actually connects to something worth flagging about the timing of this whole relocation.
It's very unusual to see this, so something has got to be in it for Meghan, as far as I'm concerned. There's no way that she would just walk away from the children unless there's something in it for her. And I think as these stories are coming out thick and fast, I don't think it would be too long if this is going to be an official separation, the start of the separation. I don't think these two are going to be able to play nice for very long. They have both got huge egos, and already you're seeing such chaotic press briefings from people that we know are inside the Sussex.
A previous court ruling had already established that Harry wasn't automatically entitled to state-funded protection while living abroad as a private citizen. Establishing formal UK residency again could shift that calculation considerably, since security arrangements for royal family members, even non-working ones, tend to operate under different rules once someone is actually based in the country full-time, rather than visiting periodically. Whether that specific consideration factored meaningfully into the decision, or is simply a fortunate side effect of an otherwise unrelated choice, isn't something the available reporting settles either way. As for Meghan's rumored acting role in The Gentleman, which briefly dominated headlines before appearing to collapse, the same friend quoted by Boshoff was fairly direct. It would have been a nice addition if it had worked out, but it was never actually the motivation behind this move, and relocating an entire family for a role that wasn't even contractually secured and would have lasted only a few weeks simply wouldn't make practical sense as a driving reason.
Well, what happens if someone takes his eye in the United Kingdom when Meghan is not to be seen anywhere? That's going to be the question. But of course, that is a long way away. Now, Boshoff goes on in terms of her reporting. The reality seems to be that the move is long-term, but that it will involve school terms in the UK and holidays in the US for Harry and the children, and more time than that in the US for Meghan.
That specific denial is worth remembering alongside the broader pattern of how this story has unfolded over recent weeks. The acting role rumor generated considerable coverage, then quietly collapsed once actual details emerged. If the friend's characterization here is accurate, it means an entire news cycle formed around a motivation that, according to the people closest to the couple, was never actually the real one in the first place. That's not a small detail. It suggests either a genuine misunderstanding somewhere in the earlier reporting chain or a deliberate early framing that got walked back once it stopped serving its purpose. Reading through all of this together, a specific version of events starts to take shape.
We are seeing it, you don't even need to read between the lines. It's clearly obvious, like I said, the conscious uncoupling sort of movements that we've seen that previous other celebrities have done, the manic press briefing. But when it comes to Harry and Meghan with this latest game plan, I feel like they've kind of bludgeoned their way in. If you're going to separate, if you're going to pack your kids up, you do this slowly. And for them that are always talking about privacy and security and safety, you think that this would have been all done under wraps.
One where the actual driving force behind this move is Harry's own long-held desire to raise his children in Britain, layered underneath public messaging that's tried, with mixed success, to frame the entire thing as a unified family decision, rather than what increasingly looks like two people pursuing fairly different daily lives under the same broad umbrella. That specific framing shift, from unified family decision to two parallel lives loosely connected by shared children and a shared surname, matters because of what it implies about the actual nature of the relationship going forward. Marriages built around actually shared daily life look considerably different from arrangements where each partner maintains a largely separate existence, connected primarily through logistics and co-parenting schedules rather than sustained physical presence.
There's just so many things about this entire scenario that are just not quite adding up. And it's the speed of which it has been done, and naturally timed when the royals are all on holiday to ensure maximum disruption, maximum coverage. And I honestly cannot wait for the Prince and Princess of Wales to come back in the next couple of weeks and start seeing all of the royal engagements again, because I'm sure, like myself, like many, many people, I am so, so tired of this story. And they've only literally just touched down in the last few hours.
Whether this particular couple's specific version qualifies as one or the other isn't something outside observers can fully settle. But the reported mechanics of the arrangement itself lean noticeably closer to the second description than the first. That gap between the private mechanics and the public framing matters, because it's shaped how several other outlets have handled this story. A number of publications that had previously run with softer, more optimistic versions of this narrative, suggestions the couple might eventually settle in Australia or Canada instead, or that Meghan had a confirmed acting role lined up, have had those specific claims quietly undercut by Boshoff's more detailed reporting. That's not a small thing. It suggests a considerable amount of what's been circulating publicly originated from careful media management rather than settled fact. And that management hasn't been entirely successful at keeping its own internal contradictions straight.
Way he sees it is that he will be here for the next 12 to 15 years minimum. He sees himself as a full-time father, and he will be here for them, spending every Saturday watching Archie play rugby. That is his agenda. Then, of course, you get the total lie. He and Meghan are the best and most committed parents. She's not even going to be here, please. They are the people who tell their kids no tablet screens at the dining table. There is no hankering after a royal status or royal engagements. It is not about that. He specifically doesn't want to do that.
There's also a pattern worth naming in how these stories keep surfacing. Multiple, sometimes conflicting details have been leaking out at a genuinely rapid pace since the initial announcement broke. School specifics, holiday plans, social connections, financial arrangements. Far more granular detail than a couple that's previously prioritized privacy would typically allow into public circulation if they actually wanted to avoid scrutiny. Several commentators have suggested this level of specific leaking looks less like an accident and more like a deliberate choice, one that keeps the story alive and, in the process, gives the couple repeated opportunities to characterize any resulting criticism as unfair treatment. Whether that specific framing is accurate is harder to verify than the underlying facts themselves. What's easier to establish is the basic contradiction sitting at the center of the public messaging.
And the friend said, well, this is the duration. This is until Archie and Lilibet finish school. So I'm like, well, okay, this is 15 years then. And I said, well, what about Meghan? And the friend said to me, oh, well, Meghan's already plotting out in her diary when she's going to be in the UK and which week she's going to need to be in California. And they're all going to spend the holidays in California. So they'll still really be Californian in some way. And I thought, this is Harry and the kids are now basing themselves in the UK. And Meghan will be, traveling internationally. And so, yes, she'll be in the UK for some of the term time. But this is term time only, so that's, 30 weeks a year.
A couple that spent years building a public narrative around fleeing an unsafe, hostile Britain for their children's sake is now reportedly relocating those same children back into that exact environment, driven by a desire for exactly the kind of traditional British upbringing that narrative had previously suggested wasn't safe or welcoming for them. That contradiction deserves to sit uncomfortably rather than get smoothed over. Years of public statements, interviews, and a published memoir all built toward a specific portrait. A country too dangerous, too hostile, too steeped in prejudice to safely raise children in. That portrait wasn't a passing comment. It formed the entire foundation of the original departure story, repeated across nearly every major interview since. A move back specifically for the benefit of British schooling doesn't require abandoning every previous concern outright, but it does require some honest reckoning with how thoroughly it undercuts the emotional weight that original narrative carried at the time. That specific tension hasn't gone unnoticed. If the earlier concerns were genuinely as serious as previously described, choosing to move back specifically for schooling raises fair questions about what's actually changed. And if those concerns turn out to have been overstated, that raises a different set of questions about how much of the original departure narrative held up under scrutiny in the first place. None of that resolves neatly, and it probably won't for some time. What's clearer is the shape of daily life this arrangement actually produces going forward. A father based full-time in the Cotswolds, building a life around school runs and weekend rugby matches, and a mother whose actual presence in that same daily routine is, by her own team's account, going to be considerably more limited than the framing around family togetherness has suggested. There's a broader lesson worth drawing from this specific pattern, one that extends beyond any single detail in this particular story. Public statements about family unity and public statements about practical logistics don't always originate from the same underlying reality, and the gap between them tends to widen precisely in situations where there's genuine pressure to present a settled, harmonious picture to the outside world. That gap doesn't automatically mean the more cynical read is correct, but it does mean the warmer, simpler version being offered publicly deserves the same scrutiny as any other carefully managed narrative, rather than automatic acceptance, simply because it's the version that got repeated first and most often. There's also a broader financial reality worth acknowledging honestly. Meghan's commercial ventures haven't performed particularly well over the past year. The lifestyle brand hasn't achieved the traction its launch promised. A podcast deal reportedly didn't continue, and a recent television production venture generated more attention for behind-the-scenes friction than for the finished product itself. Whatever the stated reasoning behind her continued time in America, the practical commercial case for staying closely tied to that market remains properly uncertain given how those recent ventures have actually performed. Look at that commercial picture alongside the geographic split being described, because the two connect more directly than either piece of reporting acknowledges on its own. If the actual commercial justification for staying tied to California has weakened considerably over the past year, then the reasoning behind Meghan's continued time there increasingly rests less on business necessity and more on personal preference, which is a perfectly legitimate reason on its own, but a meaningfully different one than the framing currently being offered publicly. Nobody's obligated to justify wanting to remain closer to friends, familiar surroundings, or an established daily rhythm, but dressing that preference up as unavoidable professional obligation, once the professional side of the equation has grown considerably shakier, starts to look less like circumstance and more like a story chosen for how it sounds, rather than how accurately it reflects what's actually happening. So here's where this all actually lands. A 15-year commitment, according to sourcing close to Harry himself. A geographic arrangement that has Meghan present for a clear minority of the actual calendar year. A stated motivation centered entirely on education and fatherhood, with barely any mention of protecting or prioritizing Meghan specifically. A notable shift from how nearly every previous major decision in this relationship had been publicly framed. And a public relations operation that keeps generating contradictions faster than it can resolve them, undercut repeatedly by its own more detailed leaks. Maybe this actually is exactly what it's being presented as: two parents making a difficult, practical compromise for their children's sake, with geography simply reflecting two demanding careers rather than any deeper rift. Or maybe the arrangement itself, once you strip away the framing, describes something considerably closer to a quiet, gradual separation that neither side is currently prepared to formally announce. Both explanations remain properly plausible right now, and that's precisely what makes this particular story worth continuing to follow rather than filing away as settled. Marriages under real strain don't always announce themselves cleanly, and practical family compromises don't always look tidy from the outside either. Sometimes the two are honestly difficult to tell apart until considerably more time has passed, and the pattern becomes impossible to explain away as anything else. What actually happens over the coming months will likely tell us more than any single piece of reporting can right now, but the specific shape of this arrangement, where each of them will actually be, how much of the year they'll spend apart, who's building a life around school pickups, and who's mapping out flights back to California, is already public, regardless of how either side chooses to characterize it going forward. Watch what actually happens over the next school term, not what gets said about it in carefully worded statements. So, tell me honestly where you land on this. Does an arrangement built this specifically around geographic separation read as two people quietly heading toward the end of something, or as a properly reasonable compromise for two parents with different careers and different attachments to different places? And on Boshoff's 15-year timeline specifically, does a plan stretching that far into the future suggest real, settled commitment to Britain, or does locking in a number that large actually make you more skeptical that it holds up in practice over the years ahead? Drop your take below. I read every comment, and I'm always curious how differently people read the exact same set of facts once they're all laid out side by side like this. If you want more of this kind of detailed breakdown, the sourcing, the timelines, the parts that don't quite add up, hit subscribe and stick around for Palace Insider.